with you again on the Kevin Cook Show. Now, Heidi Hollis is, I don't know, she's had some kind of problem in Chicago. It could be anything, so and I hope and wish her the best. But she may be on later, she may not, but probably not. But anyway, it's good to be back with you, and got all kinds of news stories. Now, later tonight, after the news piece, we're going to have Bruce Gernon on, and he's written a great book called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle. And believe me, folks, this is a real deal. It's not some kind of science fiction. I've experienced some of it secondhand, and weird things happen. They've been happening in a weird combo of features all the way since Columbus's day. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the news is unfortunately pretty scary. It's scarier than the Bermuda Triangle because, as most of you are probably aware, that Kim Jong-un, the Korean dictator, has been, of course, been playing with missiles, and there was a report recently that, by the NSA, I think it was, not the NSA, but the National Security Council, NSC, that they now have the capability to actually have a miniaturized nuke on an ICBM. And yes, their missile technology is advanced enough that they could hit parts of the United States. So, I mean, really what has happened, they let this rum-dum sit there and, shake his fist at the U.S. long enough and not done anything. And obviously he intends to do something. And they're at the point now where Trump said today that fire and fury will be coming out down on North Korea unless they square away, and they're not going to square away. What I'm saying is we're moving to a nuclear and potentially at least a military and potentially a nuclear engagement in North Korea. I don't see any way out of it. This guy's a fruitcake. He's not going to back off. The Chinese can't control him, and the Russians don't care about him at all. And it's going to happen. Now, sadly, the sad part is, yes, it would be easy to vaporize this goofus, but what it is, it is questionable whether one of their nukes could hit the U.S., but it's not questionable at all. They could shoot a nuke into Seoul, South Korea, and there's millions of people in that town. So that's the problem. But this is not going to have a happy ending. So it's serious as it can be. It's not going to go away. They did make some efforts recently. Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State guy, he's saying that, he's trying to make overtures to this guy, a non-threatening basis. And this guy was, the Kim Jong-un basically spurned it. So, guys, this is not going to go away. It's unfortunately not. And I guess if there's a moral to the story, it's that you can, you could pet an alligator all you want, but that isn't going to make him a puppy, And sometimes you have to stand up, and yes, we're going to have to vaporize this guy. And, it's unfortunate, and innocent people are going to be killed out of this. There's no way out. And China can't control this guy or won't, and we can't let him actually get to the point of shooting a nuke at Los Angeles. I mean, that's exactly what will happen. So we're going to have to just go to war over this. And it's been discussed that they'll probably, and also, by the way, he's very big on shooting these missile tests and towards Japan, which they view as a enemy as well. And this is going to have to result in nuclear warfare. It is. And there's nothing else to do. I mean, if you got the United States' interest at heart and you're going to do something, you better strike while the iron's hot before this bozo shoots one in Los Angeles. So, at any rate, that's the happy news. And it is too bad, I will admit. But this I don't see any way out of it. They tried every kind of way possible to mollify this guy, bribe him, this, that. Hasn't worked. Now, the subject matter tonight is real interesting, like I said. The Bermuda Triangle is a real issue. It really exists. There's been strange things happening all the way since, days of Christopher Columbus. And one small thing happened I can tell you about, and then we'll talk about it with the guest, is there were a couple brothers, and they were anchored just off of Miami. I mean, just about a mile off. I mean, not very far. And the boat's engine had failure. And, well, what happened was they radioed the Coast Guard to come get them. And they were near a buoy, and they said, this is buoy number 123 or whatever it was. And so we're talking, well-charted waters here. I mean, it's just, like I say, just off the coast. And the Coast Guard sent a cutter out there, and the people were gone. I mean, gone. And the Coast Guard responded within 20, 30 minutes. They were gone. They didn't, and these people disappeared off the face of the earth. And these were just regular folks. These weren't fruitcakes. They weren't drug dealers or anything exotic. They said basically, look, we're just out here. I think they were basically just looking at the fireworks because, frequently they'll shoot fireworks off the water and all that. And just call the Coast Guard because of engine failure, just regular, steady Freddy workers in Miami. And they were gone, never seen from again, period. And that's not an isolated occurrence. I mean, it's happened many, many, many times. And I won't get into specifics now. I'll save that for the program. But my father was a consultant to the Coast Guard. He did it as a volunteer basis. And he was in charge of hiring instructors for boating courses for all of South Florida. Did it as a hobby. Okay. And in the context of that, he hobnobbed with a lot of admirals developing the, the programs and curriculum for different areas and all this, their content and all. And he got to know the admirals pretty well. And he asked them, because he was, of course, a master yachtsman in Florida and all that. And he talked about the comings and goings on in the Bermuda Triangle. And they said, basically, all that's as true as it true gets. 10% of the odd occurrences, there is no explanation, no legitimate explanation, like the one about the two brothers that radioed for engine failure. No, these guys didn't have time to go anywhere. Before the Coast Guard responded. And it's highly unlikely. Oh, by the way, this is not an isolated occurrence at all, but there's no way that they were subject to immediately being vamped by pirates or something like that. The chances are almost zero that could have happened. And there's many, many, many similar occurrences. So Bruce is going to talk about this, and it's going to involve more than just what you'd expect. Interdimensionality, this bizarre stuff. Florida's a strange place. And Florida, actually, the Tampa Tribune even has a section that's weird Florida news. So, and a lot of it's just funny stuff, funny ha-ha stuff, but it is chock full of whatever really exists. Another dimension, a bleed over. It's just hard to say. But I know you'll find it a good show. And I don't know, life... What's that old saying? The truth is stranger than fiction. Well, in this case, it is. And unfortunately, the Kim Jong-un thing is too. But listen, we'll be back in just a few seconds or a few minutes rather, with Bruce Gernon. And I know you'll enjoy this show. We'll be right back. Well, it's good to be back with Bruce. And let me give you a little synopsis on Bruce. Bruce Gernon is a certified seaplane flight instructor, a master captain with the Coast Guard license. He's appeared in 36 documentaries about the Bermuda Triangle, in which he describes his space/time warp experience, often as the featured interviewee. And Gernon has coined the term electronic fog. He resides in Boynton Beach, Florida, with his wife Lynn, and his website is www.electronicfog.com. Bruce, how are you doing tonight? You doing okay?
Yeah, great, Kevin. How about you?
Well, not bad. In the intro, I told him a little small story I had from many years ago about some people that were two brothers that were, how in Florida frequently in like Christmas holidays or whatever, they'll shoot off fireworks and so forth. And they were about a mile off of Miami, and they were just watching the fireworks or whatever. And they had some engine failure, and they radioed into the Coast Guard to come get them or whatever, give them some assistance. Bruce, they disappeared off the planet Earth. I mean, these were just steady Freddy guys. I mean, not drug dealers or anybody in seamy lifestyle or anything untoward. They were never seen again. Now, that's some weird stuff. And they were, by the way, they were right near a buoy, like buoy number whatever, 456, whatever it was. And they radioed into the Coast Guard, the buoy number, and they knew exactly where it was. They were there within 20, 30 minutes, never saw these guys, never found the boat, nothing. And they never were found in their normal activities. I mean, they were both middle-aged guys with regular jobs, and that's exactly what happened. So that's Florida for you. It really is.
Right. Yeah. Well, what year was that?
It was many years ago. The story was from. I saw it on a story Beyond Belief. I believe it was in the late 1990s, but the story was circa 1988 or so.
Yeah. Well, it's still continuing to this day. So it's becoming more evident that there's something suspicious going on with these disappearances. They're all around the state of Florida and in the Bahamas, mostly around Andros Island is where this takes place over the Great Bahama Bank. But there's been a lot of disappearances in the past, and it's still continuing right to this day.
Well, I told the folks also that my father was a consultant to the Coast Guard as far as, hiring, on a volunteer basis, hiring instructors, teach boating courses. And in his efforts as with the Coast Guard, he hobnobbed with a lot of admirals, and they said 10% of the cases are just inexplicable. I mean, cigarette burning in an ashtray, which would take at the most 10 minutes to burn out. And the Coast Guard would come up upon a yacht, and there'd be no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing like that, no wreckage or seeming problem. And the people are gone. Gone is just gone. I mean, without any explanation. And the Coast Guard cutter could tell what was on the surface in a 10-mile radius. They could see if somebody took them off in a helicopter. They could tell that. And in other words, no good logical explanation. None. And it's just a weird place, Florida. It just is. And I mentioned that as a backstory, and I know you've got a lot more exotic stories, but I'm just saying it was interesting because I grew up with this kind of facet. And,
well, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. I did get to see a UFO once that came from, it was high up, and it spiraled down. We were offshore about 5 miles off of Boca Raton, heading for Palm Beach. And we saw a light up high, maybe several thousand feet. And it was a few miles away from us. And it slowly was shooting a beam of light in counterclockwise in rather slow motion as it spiraled downward. And then it went right into the ocean and then disappeared. So I think what you're talking about has to do with the possibility of alien abductions that have to do with the water, like underwater submerged objects.
Well, what Rico's just overrun with UFO sightings, if I remember correctly. I mean, there's a fellow that I've had some contact with. He's out of Asheville. The name escapes me right now, but he's one of Heidi Hollis, my co-host friends. And Warren, Joshua Warren, that's who it is. And anyhow, he speaks of all kinds of oddities in Puerto Rico, and it's supposed to be just a UFO hotbed. And actually, you may or may not know this, Bruce, but probably do. But even Christopher Columbus, when they first came to this area, noticed odd lights and bizarre things that were unusual for him being a veteran seafarer and all that. And even he noticed oddball things. That's before any movies or anything of UFO nature being mentioned.
Right, yeah, and the way he explained it reminds me of a UFO that I saw once when I was flying over Miami at night, and he explained it like it looked like a candlelight, but it was bobbing up and down and making strange movements, and I saw something very similar to that once that ended up being a close encounter, the closest I've ever been to a UFO, within a few feet of it, really. And
wow, that's something. That really is something. I mean, obviously, with this kind of track record for hundreds of years, and no doubt probably thousands, this is not a phenomenon that's fleeting or just someone's imagination or anything else. It's just exotic. It's just exotic stuff. And there's one story I'll tell you before you get going is, okay, there was, you're probably familiar with this story, but Eastern Airlines, of course, was part of my upbringing because we were always flying up and down the East Coast on it. But there was a time when, and this was also from that Beyond Belief show, they highlighted it, is there was a Eastern Airlines flight coming into Miami. It was coming in, I guess, directionally from Atlanta or somewhere where we cut across the Glades and then landed in Miami. And it disappeared from radar. And they were all bats because they didn't know what happened. Did the flight go down? They didn't know what happened. And all of a sudden it pops back on radar and lands. And they didn't know what to do, so they sent emergency vehicles out there, not knowing what they'd find. And the crew, this was back in the time where they had the rolling ladders where it rolled up, to the airplane like a long, tall metal ladders. And the crew came off, and they're wondering, what's all the hubbub? Why all the excitement? And they were disappeared off radar for 10 minutes, and all the watches of the crew were off for 10 minutes.
yes, I remember reading about that in one of Charles Berlitz's books. Might have been the one that I was in, his second book about the Bermuda Triangle called Without a Trace. And,
okay. But I mean, it was just so exotic, and thankfully, in this case, nobody was hurt or disappeared. But I mean, it was just the 10 minutes was just gone. Just gone.
Yeah, and they were in the same exact area where I had that experience with time warp.
Oh, they were the same sector. Okay.
Yeah, they were coming in from the Bahamas, heading direct to Miami, just like me.
Wow. Well, something's obviously flawed down there. You had your initial experience was what, when you were 18 and just recently learned how to fly? And
well, no. I learned how to fly when I was 17.
Oh, okay.
I was 23 when I had this phenomenal experience in the Bermuda Triangle.
Oh, okay. Why don't you tell? Let's see. We got enough time. Why don't you tell the folks about it?
Okay. Yeah, it happened on December 4th of 1970, and I was on Andros Island in the Bahamas. That's the largest of all the Bahama Islands.
Yeah.
And I had been doing business there, working on a resort that we were trying to develop. And I had made the flight there at least a dozen times or more. And it was Friday morning. We were planning on taking off. And back then they didn't have any telephones, so I couldn't get a weather report. And so there were heavy rains. And, so we couldn't take off. So we had to wait until finally around 3 o'clock it started letting up. And that's when we actually lifted off at 3 p.m. exactly in the afternoon from Fresh Creek, it's called, the town there in Andros. And we were planning on heading direct to Bimini, and then we'd make a slight turn northerly to go direct to Palm Beach International Airport. And so the total flight was 215 miles, and it should take about an hour and 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And my dad was a co-pilot, and he was a licensed pilot, and he was a chief navigator, and I was the pilot in command. And we had a business partner with us, a passenger in the back seat, and we were flying a brand new Bonanza A36, a gorgeous airplane that's still being made today.
Oh, yeah.
The body hasn't changed at all. It's a classic airplane.
Oh.
And, it's 6 passengers, but there were only 3 of us in there. So when we took off, there was a light mist and overcast of about 8, so we stayed at 1,000 feet, and we were heading direct to Bimini. We started picking up some of the navigational on our instruments, electronic instruments for navigation. We picked up Bimini, and we got a direct heading toward Bimini, and we stayed at 1,000 feet. And then when we finally got over the ocean, the atmosphere cleared up, and it wasn't overcast anymore, and it looked like there were clear skies. And so we started climbing up, and this is where the Great Bahama Bank is, and so now we're heading westerly. And I noticed a few miles offshore, there's this cloud that was a bit unusual. It just seemed to be hovering there at about 500 feet above the surface, and it was about a mile long and 1,000 feet thick and maybe half a mile wide. And it had real silvery edges, it's like silk. They were streamlined. And it looked like what's called a lenticular cloud. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but lenticular clouds around South Florida and the Bahamas, they rarely form, but when they do, they're usually 20 or 30,000 feet high, not 500 feet above the ocean. And it looked harmless, though. And so it happened to be right in my flight path. And so I went ahead and just started climbing up over it. And then when I got...
Tell you what, I don't mean to interrupt, Bruce, but I guess we might pause because we're coming up to our bottom of the hour break, and we'll pick it right up from that point when we get back.
Okay, so, sounds good.
But I mean, this is the mystery's intensifying. But let's take a break now. We'll be right back. Well, it's good to be back with Bruce, and I guess we stopped in the middle of all this intense mystery here with the cloud, and what happened then, Bruce?
Yeah, right where this cloud formed is where the mystery really starts. Okay. It looked like a harmless little cloud, and so I climbed right up over it, and when I got up to about 3,000 feet above it, I started filing my flight plan. See, I had to contact Miami radio, it was called, and I had to file a flight plan in order to legally fly back to Florida. And so I was busy filing that and not paying a lot of attention to this little cloud that I flew over. So when I completed that, I looked around, and I was probably maybe 5,000 feet by now, climbing up at 1,000 feet per minute. And this little cloud had done something very unusual. It had spread out. And I could only see it all around me, behind me, in front of me, and just below me. And so I thought, well, maybe it's the birth stage of a cumulonimbus thunderstorm. And I just happened to fly right over it while it was born. And I figured, well, I'm flying at 105 miles an hour while I'm climbing. And I figured, well, I'll get away from it in a minute or two. And so I keep climbing, and I can't get away from it. And then it catches up to me, and I go inside it. And now I'm maybe at 6,000 feet or so, and visibility is near zero in this white cloud, which looked normal inside the cloud, but it had updrafts. And so it would give me a boost when I got inside it. and I'd shoot up out of it, and I'd get a couple 100 feet above it, and then it would catch back up to me again. I was only stay clear of it for maybe 30 seconds or so.
Yeah.
And then I go back in it again. I mean, this went on for like maybe 4 or 5 times, so it got to the point where I was getting so high up, I was starting to get a little concerned, and my dad said maybe we ought to go back to Andros and make a 180-degree turn. But I figured, well, this storm has built up so big, I'd be flying right back into the heart of the storm. I really didn't want to do that, and so I kept climbing for a little more, and then finally when I got to 11,500, I was just about ready to go ahead and make that turn, but then we broke free.
Oh,
and I'm in the clear again. So I level off, and then I look around me, and I was amazed to see what had happened to this small lenticular-shaped cloud. It had spread out on either side of me as far as I could see, and the visibility was around 10 miles or more on that day. And
how long a period would it take when spreading out, what, 20 minutes, 10 minutes? Or?
10 minutes. It took 10 minutes of climbing.
Oh, okay.
To level off at that altitude of 11,000.
That usually doesn't happen. I mean, even the storm cloud wouldn't develop that quickly, would it?
No, never, not that. Well, it was more than just a storm. Now, it wasn't a little cumulonimbus thunderstorm. It was a huge squall, apparently.
Oh.
And it had built up to over 20,000 feet. So that's why I didn't want to turn around, because it was building up behind me while I was going forward. And I figured I wouldn't want to go back into the middle of that. And I noticed it was strange because it was perfectly curved, like in the shape of a semicircle as I looked behind me and to the sides. And it seemed to have a perfect curve to it. And most squalls have like lumpy lines. They may be curved, though. A lot of them are curved, but not perfectly curved.
Yeah.
And I tried to forget about it, and I leveled off and started cruising at almost 200 miles an hour, and sat back and relaxed now for a little while I was happy I escaped this storm. I thought that was the end of it until just a couple minutes later, I look in front of me, and now I see another huge squall, only now it's built up to over 40,000 feet.
Gee whiz.
And it's curved just the opposite of the one I just escaped. Now the semicircle is facing in front of me instead of behind me.
Yeah.
And
wow.
So I couldn't fly over it. It was way too high.
Yeah.
And I figured, well, I'll fly under it. And I noticed that I can't fly under it because it's laying right on the surface of the ocean. I was over the Great Bahama Bank where this formed. So I couldn't fly under it. So I'm on an instrument course direct navigating to Bimini. So I stay on that course, and I figured, well, I'll stay on the course and penetrate into it and see what it looks like inside. So I went inside it, and the visibility wasn't that bad. It was, you could see the ocean, I'm 2 miles high, and I could see the ocean, and the visibility appeared to be a few miles, but there wasn't any precipitation. But
no lightning or anything like that?
Yeah, well, that's the scary part. There was an unusual form of lightning going on in there. It was like flashes instead of lightning bolts. And the
really?
deeper I penetrated, the more intense these flashes became. And it apparently was just full of electricity, so I didn't want to continue with all this electronic lightning going on. It was just way too intense. Right. So after I went in maybe a mile or two, I decided to get out of it. So I turned left and headed due south. And I popped back out of the storm and started flying along the edge of it. And then I contacted Miami Radio because I had deviated from the flight path. And I let them know that. And I told them I was heading due south. I'm going to see if we can fly around this squall. And they said, well, fine. call us up after you get around it. And they had reported to me earlier that there were no storms in between Andros Island and Florida, but there were several large scattered storms in South Florida that I should be able to circumnavigate to get to Palm Beach.
Yeah.
So I'm flying along the edge of this storm, and I keep looking for a way to get around it, and then I notice it's curving back and connecting to the storm that I had just escaped.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so in other words, if you were looking at it from a satellite, it would look kind of like a donut.
Yeah.
It would be like 40 miles in diameter and with a 20-mile clear opening in the middle.
Gee whiz.
So
that's not common practice. I mean, storms usually don't do this, right?
No. So I call this a time storm. And I actually have some radar images of them forming. And
wow.
I realized that I was pretty much trapped inside this strange storm, and I couldn't fly back to Andros.
Wow.
And so then I saw an unusual thing happen, and apparently it happened on the exact opposite end of where this storm formed. It's like this small lenticular cloud had spread out into the shape of this circle.
Yeah.
Right over the surface and built up high at the same time, and it met on the bottom. And it formed like a huge valley in between the top part of it. So I figured, well, that's aiming toward Miami, so I'll shoot through that valley.
Yeah.
And so I made a turn toward the west and started aiming for the valley. Well, then these two anvil heads formed on the top of each cloud. And then the two anvil heads connected. And so this huge horizontal tunnel formed.
Huh.
And it was like a mile in diameter to start off with.
Wow.
And I consulted with my dad, and he agreed that that was probably the only way to escape this storm.
He was probably freaking out too, I guess, huh?
Yeah, well, we were concentrating on flying the airplane.
Sure.
Trying to get back home. And
yeah.
So we decided to go ahead and go for it. And I noticed that the tunnel was getting smaller, and it was like at least 10 miles long. And it started shrinking in diameter as we aimed for it. And then I saw that it was a little below us. It was, the center of it was around 10,000. So I started diving down, and then I noticed it was closing kind of fast. So I went to full power. And so when we reached the entrance of the tunnel, it was probably maybe 700 or 800 feet in diameter.
Wow.
And then when the aircraft penetrated into the tunnel, something incredible happened.
Good Lord, what happened?
Well, when I viewed the tunnel from outside, it had smooth edges to it, and the sun was shining through it, making it glow bright, silvery white. And the edges were very silky smooth. Yeah. And the sun was setting. It was like 3:30, exactly 3:30 in the afternoon when we penetrated it. When the aircraft entered, these strange clouds formed inside the tunnel. They were like puffs of clouds. They were like, see, the size of a bus. Uh-oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
They were about the size, say, like a bus or Volkswagen bus or a regular bus. They all were a little bit different in size.
Yeah.
And they were separated from each other, but they formed lines that rotated counterclockwise, and they went all the way to the exit, the other end of the tunnel. And they were like hovering off of the tunnel walls. They were like 20 feet or so off the tunnel walls, 10 feet or so. No one's really quite figured that out, why that happened.
But, and this is totally different than any other thing you've seen before, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, I've never seen anything like that before. But I believe what I was seeing was the fabric of time when that happened.
Okay.
Yeah, I was seeing time itself.
It could be. I mean, of course, I can't relate to it in any way, but I mean, it sounds like it's unlike anything you observe as a pilot. And golly, that just sounds like a nightmare, a living nightmare. I'm glad you got out of it.
Well, that's when time started changing, because I have a lot of photos of these tunnels. And in my new book, I've got the best photo I've ever taken of one of these tunnels. Actually, there's two of them. And it's over the Everglades, where there's been experiences with fog. Where I actually experienced this electronic fog over the Everglades in 1996.
Oh.
And so in my book, there's a really good photo. The tunnels it's about 5 miles long. And it's a good example of what these tunnels look like. And it should have taken me, at the speed I was going and the distance the tunnel was, about 3 minutes to reach the other end of the tunnel.
Sure.
But it only took around 20 seconds.
20 seconds?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because time was changing right then. It was starting to change. And the tunnel was rapidly closing. So when I reached the end of the tunnel, and if you look at the cover of my book, it shows the aircraft getting ready.
Beyond the paranormal, beyond the Bermuda Triangle. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It shows the tunnel exit when the airplane is only like maybe like 1,000 feet or less from the exit.
Right.
And now that it had closed down to a diameter of about 40 feet. And,
wow.
And then when I reached the end of the tunnel, it was only 30 feet because the wingtips scraped the edges of the tunnel. And then when I look back at the tunnel, it collapsed and it formed like a slit. And the slit kept rotating clockwise instead of counterclockwise, because I was looking at it from the other side.
Yeah.
And then another incredible thing happens. The clear blue sky that we were aiming for instantly vanished.
Vanished? Really?
And this is where what I call electronic fog attached itself to the aircraft. And it also gave us a sensation of zero gravity that I've never felt before, because it wasn't just zero gravity. It was a combination feeling of hydroplaning, skidding forward, like somehow skipping forward.
Yeah.
I could feel it in my body, and along with the zero gravity. And it lasted about 10 seconds while this fog attached to us.
Huh.
And that's part of the theory, where the latest theory is by Professor David Paris. I've been working with him for 5-6 years or so.
Uh-huh.
Scientist from the University of Nebraska. He's a physicist and a meteorologist. And we've been on TV together like 5 times on documentaries. And he believes that when I came out of that tunnel, I thought I was 90 miles east of Miami.
Okay.
But he says I was only 10 miles east of Miami.
How do you figure that?
Well, at first I couldn't believe it either, but it took me a few months to grasp what he's talking about, and he's got it all. Then there's a chapter about him in my book, he spells it out mathematically as to what happened, and he's got even a lot more detail in a website that he has called The Science Behind Bruce Gernon's Flight.
Oh, really?
But I thought when I came out of that tunnel and entered this electronic fog that it attached to me, which took me 30 years to figure that out, and I believe it's going to become a fact someday. But
yeah,
I thought that I was in this fog for 3 minutes, and then it electronically dissipated for me. It's like it was an electronic dissipation. Mm-hmm. And these slits formed around the airplane. And first they were like lines, and they were parallel to the direction of flight. And since I didn't realize this was attached to me, I thought I was flying through this fog. And so my mind made me think these slits were like a few miles long. But in reality, they were only maybe a few hundred yards long. It's like a sphere of electricity combined with fog and magnetism that connects to the vessel. And so the slits opened up, the lines turned into slits, and then the slits kept opening up, and I could see blue sky through the slits. And it took about 10 seconds for them to dissipate, and then it was all clear blue sky. And then,
well, I'm glad to see that.
Well, yeah, I had been contacted to Miami radio, and they were trying to locate me, and they couldn't find me on radar. And,
oh, really? The same kind
of thing. And then they came back on the radio, and they were all excited, and they said, oh, we got an airplane directly over Miami Beach. And I said, well, no, that can't be me, because I'm still looking for Bimini about 80 miles away. You know?
Yeah.
And but then my eyes focused, and I could see, yeah, it was Miami Beach.
That's cool.
And so I signed off with him. And then I flew on to Palm Beach International, and I had to fly way out west over the Everglades to get around a huge storm that was over Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah.
And so I had to go out of my way. So the flight was more like 250 miles instead of 215. And then when we landed, I noticed that the time was strange. It only took like 47 minutes to make the flight, and normally it takes like at least an hour and 20 minutes.
So everything was way off. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, so I couldn't understand what happened, but I realized I had experienced something really phenomenal. So I started putting it to memory right at that point there. But back to Professor Paris, see, when I came out of that tunnel, he believes, and he's got this on mathematically explained, that it's kind of like a wormhole. It's like I instantly, it was like I was teleported.
Yeah.
It would be 80 miles after I came out of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. Instantly, 80 miles in a fraction of a second.
Wow.
And then I actually slowed down after that, and I was 10 miles offshore of Miami, and so it took the normal 3 minutes to reach Miami. So see, I entered that tunnel at exactly 3:30, and I ended up in Miami at 3:33 and 20 seconds.
Good Lord, what a deal. Well, you were dealing. I'm glad your dad was with you as a co-pilot or as a navigator, and the business partner too, because I mean, which touch on your own sanity and everything, I guess, because that would be a mind-warping experience, which you just went through.
Yeah, well, it was. Yeah, well, our passenger was trying to help, and he thought he saw an island, but then I took a look at it, and it was just a dark area of the clouds and the fog. Yeah. And then something happened to him, and he became I guess you'd call it nauseous, but he couldn't pronounce words anymore.
Oh, really? Kind of
Yeah, it
affected
was
his
like
consciousness.
it was almost like he was dying. It reminds me of a
What?
guy that worked for me that died. And last words I had with him were nonsense words. He couldn't really pronounce anything, but that's the way he was.
Yeah.
And then my dad, he went into a state of panic while we were in the fog. When I was talking to the radar controller, and he said he couldn't identify us anywhere. My dad grabbed the mic, ripped the microphone out of my hands, and started screaming at him.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, cussing at him even.
Yeah.
And you never cuss.
You're reacting to stuff. You're reacting to stuff. Sure, but you're reacting to stuff that was just unprecedented, not in your experience. I'm sure it was bewildering.
But so I had to kind of grab the mic back from him and calm him down.
Sure. Wow, what a deal, boy. So I guess you finally landed in Miami. You're pretty darn happy, huh?
Yeah. Well, I flew over Miami, and then we turned north, and we went to Palm Beach International.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we were definitely happy to make it back.
Yeah. But you knew, all three of you probably knew you just experienced something that was way out of the ordinary, way super paranormal, I guess you might call it. Yeah.
Yeah, supernatural, unexplainable, and
sure.
We really couldn't even talk to each other about it because it couldn't really explain it.
Yeah, I know. I some baffling. Yes, I guess so.
So I didn't tell anybody about it for just over a year because I didn't know what to tell people. And then I was watching the Dick Cavett show. He had a late night show, and he had a scientist named Ivan Sanderson on.
Oh, yes, I remember that name. I sure do.
Yeah, and he had done a lot of research about this phenomenon, and he started explaining how it had something to do with time, he said, and that's when I realized that time was the key to the explanation of what I experienced.
Well, it had to have been to cover those distances. Well, I tell you what, Bruce, we're just about to our top of the hour break. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back and talk some more about this issue. We'll be right back.
Okay, Kim.
Well, it's great to be back with Bruce Gernon, and boy, that was a heck of a story. I can see that experience would last for your whole life. And I want to mention before we get back into it with Bruce, his website is electronicfog.com, and he's oh my goodness, he's written lots of books. Oh no, that's Rob, that's the big author. I'm sorry, but electronicfog.com. Now, Bruce, there was one other experience. Oh golly, I guess there's so many different experiences in Florida that you could have many books just on those. But of course, I mentioned the Eastern Airlines people that lost 10 minutes in time, but aren't there a lot of experiences around Andros Island with UFOs and things like that?
Yes, definitely. Andros is, to me, is the center of the Bermuda Triangle. And there's been many encounters all around Andros Island. On the western shore of Andros Island is where the Great Bahama Bank is, and that's only like 15 to 20 feet deep. And it's
Isn't there a semi-secret base called Autech down there that?
Right, and they're based on the eastern shore of Andros, and right on the eastern shore is the tongue of the ocean, which is a very unusual body of water that connects to the deep Atlantic and the Sargasso Sea, and then it comes in and goes by Andros, first Nassau, and then it makes a curve, and it goes north and south for about 100 miles, and it's about 30 miles wide, and it's 6,000 feet deep.
Good Lord.
And that's where the Navy has a top secret base for submarine research.
Supposedly. I wonder if they're researching this, is what I'm wondering.
Well, that's the hint that they call it the area, underwater area 51.
Yeah.
And there have been people that have seen submerged UFOs in the area. And I had
I'll bet there have.
A meeting once with a guy that was an executive for one of the commanders there, but he was a scientist, I believe. And we were at a local restaurant, and we're at the bar waiting for the dinner call, and so he told the bartender to ask me if I would join him, because he knew who I was. So he recognized me because I've been on a lot of documentaries.
Sure.
And, so I went over and joined him, and he had a nice shirt on, and a polo shirt, and it said AUTEC on the chest.
Oh yeah.
Which is the name of that facility. And so I realized, he's one of the guys that works there. And so he said, yeah, he's a scientist with the submarines. And he says, getting ready to retire pretty soon. And he'd probably had a few too many drinks. And he says, I'm going to tell you two incredible stories.
Oh.
And so then he told me that he was in the submarine not too long ago, and he was on the southern end of that tongue of the ocean, about 3,000 feet down, testing the submarines and missiles, or what do they call them, torpedoes.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all their electronic navigational instruments went haywire, which is what happened to me when I was in this electronic fog. Same thing. Compasses were rotating.
Yeah.
They couldn't identify their exact location through their instruments. But they knew they were on the south end of the tongue of the ocean.
Sure.
So then after several minutes, similar to me, the instruments start working again. And so they verify their position. And now they're at the north end of the tongue of the ocean. They had done something similar to what I did. Only they did it underwater in a submarine. They traveled 100 miles in 3 minutes.
Which is impossible, sure. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, by conventional application would be impossible.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, there's been all kinds of rumors about AUTEC as far as what they're really working on, but matter of fact, there's even been a couple paranormal shows that have alluded to AUTEC. They had some kids they found down there, and they're hunting ducks or whatever they were doing on Andros, and they let them go, but the commander basically said we could lock you up and throw away the key if we wanted to, or something like that, relative to the goings-on at AUTEC. Wow, 100 miles in 3 minutes, fantastic. Obviously, it suspends the normal laws of physics. I guess so.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing that I did, though.
Yeah.
Only I was 2 miles high.
Wow. That is just something that really is. What an exciting experience. Well, of course, there's been many other stories down there like that, but yours is just phenomenal. I guess you all talked about it for years, or was it too upsetting to talk about, or?
No, just the first year. I didn't talk about it because it was unexplainable, but I've been talking about it nonstop now for 46 years.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the shock is over. But I guess I'm just wondering how you all interacted among each other for a while. I guess was
Yeah, well, the passion's not over. I'm passionate about it because I feel it's very important that mankind really knows about this. It's just as important as lightning or a hurricane or a tornado.
Oh, yes,
And
absolutely.
someday
Absolutely.
I hope that it will be identified in similar terms. It'll become
Sure.
a meteorological term, just as familiar as lightning. There
Yeah.
will be something called electronic fog that everyone needs to know about because it can happen on the ground, which I explain in my book, some incredible cases that it's happened to people on the ground. And it can happen in
There was
the
a
air
time.
or on the sea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now,
And
Flight
it's going
19
to,
was a famous. I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's going to, in the immediate future, when they realize that it's real, it will save lives, especially for aviators. And this is one of the things that I have a hard time understanding, and because I suppose because it's controversial, it's like the professional pilots kind of ignore this
Hmm.
because it's
Oh, they
it's
just.
not a part of meteorology. So since it's not a part of meteorology, meteorologists don't recognize it. So since meteorologists don't recognize it, professional pilots don't recognize it. And look what happened to Flight 19 and the Malaysian airliner that we just lost. Is probably the greatest airplane mystery in modern times. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
240 people died. And I believe that they were in electronic fog, and they had no idea they were in it. And if they knew what electronic fog was, they probably could have escaped it.
Yeah. Well, is there some kind of? I mean, if it exists and it's been experienced so thoroughly, then I wonder why does mainline science not want to acknowledge it? Is that it, or?
Well, they're starting to. Something like this, it's that important for all of mankind. It takes a
Yeah.
long time. I mean, it took like 30 years for scientists to finally come up with the term of tornado. They knew there was this thing that twisted around,
Yeah.
and it took 30 years to identify it. Well, I've been
Well, I didn't
working
know they
on
wrestled with it for that long. I didn't know that at all. No.
Yeah, and
Huh.
well, look at the hurricanes. The Spanish lost like billions of dollars worth of treasures in their ships.
Oh, all the
They had
time.
no idea that there was such a thing as a hurricane.
Yeah. There was a guy that was what he called a salvage guy for Fidel Castro for years, and he got 10% of whatever galleons he brought up, and he was a billionaire before it was all over, and his 10%.
Right. So it takes a long time. So that's what keeps me going anyway. That's why I don't give up, because I believe that I know it's going to take a long time for this to happen. You know, maybe another 20 years or something. We're getting closer. My friend Gian Quasar, you ever hear of him? He
No, I
wrote
can't say.
a very popular book on the Bermuda Triangle that came out right around the same time as my first book on it came out, around 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a short story in there about me. He's probably knows more about the Bermuda Triangle through his research than anyone in the world. And so now he's come out with a second book called Bermuda Triangle #2. And in this book, coincidentally, it came out almost exact same time as my new book. And he talks about electronic fog throughout the entire book. And so he's recognizing my theory of electronic fog as being the main theory of the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, the #1 theory. And there's like a dozen different theories. And he goes on and on in his book telling about how my theory is what it's all about.
Really? Well, I don't want to we're coming just about to our last break, and I didn't want to get you going on and cut you right off or anything like that. But I had just in brief, I'm just to see if you had a similar experience down there. I had a friend that was a petty officer of the watch on a naval carrier that was going from Galveston to Pensacola. And what happened was they saw lights of another ship that didn't show up on radar. And there was 300 seamen watching this, and the Pentagon got involved with it because it was near a carrier, you know. I mean, and of course, they're excited about their carriers because they're such important vessels. And anyhow, they saw lights of another ship, and everybody saw it, and it didn't show up on the Pentagon's radar or the ship's radar or anything else. And have you experienced things like that in the Bermuda Triangle, or no instances like that? Where they see ghostly lights or something?
Well, it was just over a year later where I had that experience with a flying saucer.
Oh, okay. Well, this was just amazing. This was just amazing because they actually saw the running lights of a ship, and no ships showed up on the radar. Yet other ships did show up.
Well, what I experienced was amazing too. It was a perfect, clear night, and I took my girlfriend up, and we went flying. Just
I don't mean, Bruce, but we're coming to our last break. Let's get right into it as soon as we get back, okay? Because I don't want to step on this one. We'll be right back. Well, it's great to be back with Bruce, and we've got some really, really good stories here. And, of course, time's wasting on us like it always does. We've got a good guest. But I want to also mention that Bruce's book is Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, and he wrote it. Bruce Gernon did with Rob McGregor as a contributing author, and his website is once again electronicfog.com. But Bruce, you were mentioning the UFO sighting you'd seen and describing that.
Yes, it was just over a year after I had that experience in the Bermuda Triangle, and we went flying at night in the same airplane that I had that experience in, and I went up with my girlfriend because it was such a beautiful, clear night, and we thought we'd just check it out and look at the lights of South Florida. So we took off and from Palm Beach International, and we started heading south toward Miami, and so I climbed all the way up to 10,000 feet. So it seems odd that I would do that because that's the altitude I was at when I went through that tunnel. And so we flew over Miami, the city of Miami, and saw all the incredible lights. And then we started heading offshore, and we saw Miami Beach. And then so we headed out, and there wasn't any moon that night. And we went about 5 miles offshore, and it was like a black abyss underneath us, the ocean. Mm-hmm. And we could see the stars above us, though. And then we look off toward Bimini, 50 miles away, and we see this strange light. And it kind of reminds me of when Christopher Columbus reported a strange light. It looked like a candlelight, but it was kind of bobbing up and down and making these erratic movements sideways and backwards. I watched it for a minute or so, and we both saw it and wondered, what the heck is that? And it was amber in color, and like a candlelight. And then all of a sudden, it shoots directly toward us.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but it was on the same exact flight path that I took when I flew through that tunnel.
Gee whiz.
And it's aiming right at us, and it only took a matter of seconds for it to come right at us. And I'm cruising about 180 miles an hour or so, and this thing's going 1,000 miles an hour. And,
wow.
And then it gets right in front of us, and I'm looking at it, and I can see this is not a reflection. It's for real. It's solid. It's massive. It's metallic. And it had it was saucer shaped, 200 to 300 feet in diameter and 50, 60 feet deep, thick. And it had a dome on the top of it.
Oh, yeah?
And I'm thinking, well, this is the end for me.
So it sounds like the classic UFO shape they could describe. I guess.
Oh yeah, it's classic shape. And so, well, instead of go ahead and crashing right into it, I said, what the heck, I'm going to make a sharp turn to the left. And so I made a turn to the left, and while I was making that turn, I thought that was it. We were going to die. Sure. But then while I made the turn, I looked over, and then it was gone. It just disappeared. But I mean, I came within a few feet of it. It was that close to it.
Close call.
So that was pretty incredible. We both saw it.
I'll bet it was. I imagine it was.
And so, speaking of UFOs, famous psychic, a good friend of my co-author, Rob McGregor, he has a chapter in our book, and he did research on our flight, and so he talks about what he could see with his psychic abilities. I mean, it's incredible how he can see these things without experiencing. But he gives me his latest thing that we've been in touch with him. It's not in our book though, but he's telling us how he can see that there are these huge motherships.
Oh yeah.
Maybe close to a mile long. And they're shaped like a cigar.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have a smooth skin. They have like dimples, sort of like, almost like a cigar. You know, that cigar is not a perfect, some of them are near perfect, but
sure.
Others may have like little bumps in them and dimples. And,
a little contour, though.
Yeah. So that's what these have. And the reason they're shaped like that is because they are a living organism.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And what has happened is the aliens have learned how to take advantage of them. It's kind of like how many thousands of years ago we learned how to ride horses.
Sure.
So they've learned how to ride these things. And these things, they travel throughout the universe, from star to star. And they're huge. And within them, they carry the classic shape flying saucers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good grief. So they're like motherships or whatever you call them.
Yeah, they're like a mothership. All the aliens are, and their vehicles and everything are inside of them. And they are known to form a cloud all around them when they become on Earth and they're within visible range. They can turn into like a cloud. So people can look at them and they can't see them. And so the theory is that lenticular cloud I was telling you about, that I first encountered, that was the mothership was in that cloud. And I just happened to fly right over it when it was getting ready to depart planet Earth and go to another star. And so I got caught up in its, similar to jumbo jet's wake tip turbulence that it created.
You know what I wonder, Bruce, is with all the satellite technology we have and have had for many years, I wonder how much the government really knows about the mechanics of what you're talking about, of where they've seen these things pop in and pop out. Because we had a guy on years ago who's kind of a halfway friend of mine, or was at the time, Colonel John Alexander, and I talked to him. He was Green Beret colonel, yes, but he'd also been a consultant with NASA for 20 years. And he also was president of the International Remote Viewers Association, so he had his hand in a lot of different fields. And I asked him, how good our satellite technology was, and he said, well, you could read what brand of cigarettes you have in your pocket or something if you were a smoker. And I wonder how much we've seen with these satellites and all this.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised that the satellites haven't identified these time storms that I call. Well, I have them on radar, but and I believe that eventually the drone, probably operated by NASA, will be able to fly through one of these time tunnel vortexes, I call them, like the one I flew through.
What if they already have? That's what I'm thinking.
Well, if they have, they're not telling anybody.
Oh, they don't tell anybody anything, really.
Yeah.
But what I'm just guessing that's why I asked him, Alexander, just for trying to prime him for information, is that, yes, in other words, our satellite technology is way sophisticated, more than we realize, the general public would realize. And I wonder if this AUTEC place, which is a very high-level secret installation of Andros, I wonder if that's what their whole effort is to either communicate or study this alien technology, really.
Yeah, you would think so, especially being located in Andros Island.
I know. Well, Bruce, it's been awful good having you. It's been fantastic stories. I urge everybody to get your book, Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, and also to go to your website, electronicfog.com. I think this is fascinating information that needs to be studied. It really does.
Yes, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I hope the word spreads out that there is an electronic fog, and that is what's causing this main mystery that they call the Bermuda Triangle.
Well, I urge everybody to buy the book. And once again, I thank you very much for being on the show, Bruce, and we'll keep in touch. We sure will.
All right, Kevin. Great. Thanks a lot now.
You bet. You have a good evening.
You too. Good night.
Okay. Well, I guess, folks, that was some good stuff. I mean, you're talking about experiences that nobody experiences. Anyhow, I wish you a good evening, and come back with us, and we'll be back next week with Heidi Hollis.